And I think that we are starting. Did you all get a message that we
Yeah.
are recording? Okay,
Mhm.
great. Good afternoon, friends. I'm Cynthia McBride, the pastor at First Christian Church, and I have the privilege of hosting a Zoom conversation for interfaith friends and clergy colleagues. Why don't we go around the circle and each of you just introduce yourself, and then I'll give another explanation of what we're doing today. Rabbi, would you like to start?
I was about to say, we don't know, in everyone's Zoom screen, the circle looks different, which is going to be a useful lens, actually, for some of the questions we're dealing with. Even Zoom has a difference of perspective on things. I'm Rabbi David Kosak. I have served as a senior rabbi at Congregation Neveh Shalom in Portland for the last coming on 10 years now. And we'll actually be retiring at the end of June. So it's wonderful to get to continue doing this interfaith work as I begin to wind down in my role.
Thank you. Dr. Page?
I'm the Reverend Dr. Rodney Page, the retired executive at Ecumenical Ministries of Oregon, retired as the Deputy General Secretary of the National Council of Churches, and retired as the head of Church World Service.
And our Imam.
Yeah, thank you. So my name is Abdulah Polovina. I'm an Imam of the Islamic Bosniaks Educational Cultural Organization here in Portland, Oregon. I'm here 13 years. Before that, I was Imam in Seattle, Washington. So I moved here in 2013, and started some back in Seattle Interfaith work. So now we'll continue, and I'm glad to be here and part of this interfaith, panel conversation discussion about, certain things that we, as faith leaders, kind of leading some process about, who we are and helping each other to move things in a way that is positive. God willing. Thanks.
God willing, amen. Thank you all very much, both for your introductions and for your time being here today. A word of explanation for those who will be watching this video. This group gathered in December at Neveh Shalom as an interfaith panel on peace, having a conversation about understanding what peace is from our different faith perspectives, struggling with how to work towards peace in the world. And during that panel, each of our panelists also shared very personal stories relating to experiences connected to peace. And it was a powerful presentation. That day when we met together, unfortunately, there was not time to get to what we had planned to be a question and answer dialogue. So this recording is a way to respond to some of the questions that audience members raised that day. I will simply offer the caveat that we're not going to read and answer every single question because a lot of them overlapped. So today instead is going to be a conversation among friends, each of us coming from a different faith perspective, each of us wrestling with the complex question of peace. And the reality is peace is complicated, peace is messy, peace is hard, peace is incredibly important. And so this conversation is important. But really what we're doing today is we're inviting the audience members who attended that panel to essentially eavesdrop on a conversation among friends as a way of modeling how to have interfaith dialogue. Our hope is one way that we might move forward together as a community is by encouraging dialogue among people of our different faiths, our different faith communities. That process began a little bit in December when we encouraged people to make connections one-on-one, go out to coffee, share time together. So this is a step in continuing that process. So I'm just going to dive right in with some of the topics that were raised in the questions at that December event. Let's begin by talking about our holy texts. One person raised a question about stories of violence in the Bible and asking how on earth is that a role model for people of faith to live in peace. One person asked specifically about the stories in the Hebrew scriptures when the Israelites were freed from captivity in Egypt. It in many readings appears that God was directing people to take over land and even kill some of their neighbors in terms of ethnic cleansing. How do we, as people of faith pursuing peace, read those stories? Does that have any bearing on our lives today? So I just want to kind of open the conversation with the tension between feeling led as people of faith to live in peace and some of the stories in each of our holy books that are not necessarily peaceful. And I'll let anyone respond. We don't have a set order to go in.
I guess I'll jump in then.
Thanks, David.
The void. So I think what's really interesting about this is that connected, I think, with all faith communities or all scripture-based faith communities is that the boundaries of a given faith community are measured in part by what sort of interpretations are considered acceptable and what sort of interpretations are outside of the pale. For my Christian friends, that often determines Protestant movements, right? Because of the very different approaches to interpreting the exact same text. So it's really important to realize that even within a given faith tradition, you can have different streams of what and how a difficult text can be interpreted. Speaking from a Jewish lens and perspective, I personally love our difficult texts. I actually think those are the places where we can learn and grow the most. It's very easy to find a text which completely overlaps and meshes with our contemporary values, beliefs, etc., because those texts don't challenge us. We can just sort of nod in an affirming sort of way. It is in the wrestling that actually we come to a deeper truth. And one of the unique features of Judaism is that not only do we have a very ancient tradition of producing different interpretations on the same text, they're gathered in larger books that make it very easy to see these perspectives. There's a collection called the Mikraot Gedolot, the sort of the Reader's Bible, where you'll have a bunch of great medieval thinkers, 5, 6, 8, on a given text, sharing different perspectives on it. So within Judaism, as a religion of action, of commandment, of what we call the mitzvot, we've always felt a greater openness to interpretation because our community isn't bounded by those interpretations or the much wider, we do have common action. So that's the first piece. And then the next piece is that the presence of a difficult text in Holy Scripture, so I'll speak just to the Hebrew Scriptures at this point, doesn't mean, right? We have to always ask when we come to holy text, is this being descriptive or prescriptive? And the question, I think, is concerned about prescriptive text, meaning, well, if we find in holy texts a commandment to commit war or what we would call ethnic cleansing in today's world, is that prescriptive? Are we supposed to do that too, as opposed to being descriptive? When we gathered together for our first event, I talked about how the word love, something we all would think is a positive, is mentioned 11 times in the book of Genesis, and every time it is connected with conflict. So something that we all would think is a good thing actually itself raises problems. So the presence of texts, what I call difficult text, doesn't imply anything. It comes down to the individual community and how they interpret them. And that then determines the meaning of that text for that body of believers.
Thank you, David, so much for that clear articulation of the awareness that it's not just there is one text even with each of our faiths, but there are many lenses of interpretation. I'm curious, Abdulah, in the Islamic faith, are there a lot of different streams of interpreting the Quran in different ways? Is what David is describing from both Jewish and Christian perspectives. Does that hold true for you as well?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, as other religious texts, scriptures, also Quran, our holy book, discuss about violence in some sense. But what is our belief? It's kind of that, throughout the history, from Islamic perspective, God sends 4 main books, and the only one that is original is actually the Quran. Yeah, we have we have interpretation or explanation of Quran called tafsir. So we have Islamic scholars who actually interpreting all those verses to kind of be more and in a positive way understood. The point is here that I would like to say, unfortunately, throughout the history, especially today, we are faced that some of those Islamic texts about violence is unfortunately misinterpreted by the media, by the people, because what is the point, when they explain, the mention is we need to understand the context of the time. Why is, for example, God revealed or sent some, let's say, texts about violence, how to understand, For example, we have some verses saying even that, killing polytheists, non-believers, But when we go deeply in the context of the time, we actually see that it was some kind of treaties that they're mentioned there. So actually who broke those treaties, God kind of ordered to, fight against those because they actually broke the treaties. That is something also that we need to understand. And also in our faith, there is mentioning kind of 4 of our sacred months. And one of the ruling when we, for example, that we had actually one that passed already, one of those 4 sacred months. And actually for us Muslims is throughout the history order that during those sacred months we cannot do anything that can harm others. If Muslims are in some kind of, let's say, warfare, they need to stop because to respect that sacred month. And after pass, because if somebody again break the treaty, break the truce, we are kind of ordered to kind of, let's say, in some sense challenge them in a way to why they are doing. So generally speaking, when you read the Quran, actually in Islam there is actually proclamation of self-defense. Throughout the history, if some warfare happened, how say it's more like in an ethical and moral way, kind of to help to understand and maybe establish a kind of more just and more peaceful society. As throughout the history so many things happen, invasion of some Islamic land and Muslim land. So our history is like in some sense challenged, in a way that, and then how we say, like, you need to challenge back. Sometimes, the help of sacred text, is there to kind of, in a sense, to be careful in which way to, how we say, do the warfare. And clearly, our text from the Holy Book and the prophetic teaching is that some of those things, we don't harm children, elders, even destroy the environment, so many, but unfortunately, sometimes not just there, but in general speaking, human nature is, sometimes kind of avoiding how they call, like, bad apples, and then you need to all the time challenge, kind of yourself. But point is, going from the perfect, text from our holy books to us that we are unperfect, limited, But point is, we need to understand again, to maybe conclude this part. Yes, in our book there is verses about violence or something, but point is, interpretation, and we need to understand the context of time, why is something revealed, why is something prescribe, and in which way God help, to kind of even solve certain the issue in that time, and that could be lesson, and kind of for the future generation, as it mentioned in stories in the Quran, that how we say God revealed the story to be lesson for the future generations.
I think that we can agree from all three of our faiths that understanding the context of the time when a story was recorded is very important when we look at our holy books. So let's shift to thinking about the context of this time, one area of peace and conflict that I think is uppermost in many people's minds right now, especially folks from America who are watching international news, has to do with Israel and Palestine. There were quite a few questions written at our December panel asking specifically in regards to that conflict. So I would just kind of lay Israel-Palestine on the table and see how we can respond.
Well, I will say that I have for a long time with Rabbi Stamfer of blessed memory, and also Franca Frangi of the Muslim faith, have been advocating for a two-state solution. That is now the official policy of the United States and also of Israel, although it's become more difficult because of recent events, that a two-state solution. But I think those of us in the peace movement who have long advocated for a two-state solution have said this must be if the two parties, the Palestinians and the Israelis, are to live in peace. There have been several movements over the years with communities of Palestinians, Arabs, Muslim, Christians, Hebrews, Jews, all living together in community. And that's produced some wonderful results and papers over the years and how to reduce violence and conflict. And in addition to the communities that have been in existence there in Israel and the West Bank of people living together in community, there have been organizations and educational groups. The most one that's visible, I think, that I have tried to support has been Hand in Hand, where from kindergarten through 12th grade, kids, Jewish and Muslim, Arab kids live are in community together in each one of the grades, and they're team taught by Israeli and a Palestinian teacher, and they're taught in both Arabic and Hebrew. And it's been a wonderful model that's now been replicated all across Israel in many different cities. So those things are where we can promote people living in groups, but the two-state solution has really been has very much been deprecated recently by events such as October 7th. And and there are some groups now that are advocating for Israel to annex the West Bank. The West Bank has been now a kind of a Swiss cheese of settlements that have all through the West Bank that has making a two-state solution more difficult. But I noticed even former or now President again, Trump, advocated for a two-state solution in the last days of the 2020 election cycle, in which he laid out the whole plan for a two-state solution with with Gaza and the West Bank being the primary parts of it, with a sliver of land linking Gaza and the West Bank, and also a tunnel. And then with the settlements in place, giving the Palestinians some of the Negev desert in compensation. But at least it was a step. I don't think it's amenable to either side, but it's something that was a proposal by the President of the United States of how we could come about to have a two-state solution. And don't forget, he also put in place the Abraham Accords, which was linking economically now for the first time Israel and the Arab states to do business together. And that's still in place, the Abraham Accords, so that commerce can occur and is occurring. So there are efforts on both sides to bring about a two-state solution if it can be pursued. I think it can be after the dust has been settled on it, on the current situation. I do think that we have to have more appreciation and more support for diversity. I noticed in a recent speech that President Obama said that that we must find ways to live alongside individuals and groups who are different from us. And isn't that the truth? It's not going to be easy, he said. It's going to take time. A pluralism and diversity is not about holding hands and singing kumbaya, but is building bridges that require us to deal with people who are not only disagree with us, but also probably do not respect us. So we got to learn how to do that. He went on to say, what does build trust? It builds trust if relationships that are helping people to band together to do things in the community. I remember, and I said this before, that I helped rebuild the Blackburn churches. We had so many churches burned in the South at one time by arson. And I got international paper and lumber to supply the lumber free. I've got GE to give us tons of money. And I persuaded Habitat for Humanity International to have Black and white, Jew and Gentile all coming together to rebuild Blackburn churches. And people working together on a common project enhances understanding. It enhances relationships and enhances a really building of trust and breaks down some of the barriers such as anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. Well, don't get me preaching, Pastor. I can do that sometime.
Once Rodney gets started, the stories just flow. I do think it is powerful when people who have very different lives are able to hold a common project together and work towards a common goal. Of course, part of the nature of the conflict in Israel and Palestine is that it is changing every day. It changed significantly a year ago on October 7th with horrific violence. It has changed since we were together in December. There has been a significant change in terms of an official step towards having a ceasefire and moving towards peace. I want to allow Rabbi David a chance, also Rabbi Kosak, to speak a little about Israel and Palestine, along with Rodney, what you have already said. Sorry, friend, you need to unmute yourself.
If I am muted, there is nothing I will say you will disagree with. So first of all, thank you, Rodney. And I do agree. Those peace projects and the opportunity to meet one another as human beings, which is kind of what we're modeling here, and why
Yeah.
we've done this is really, really important. We've also seen throughout history it can be fragile and requires some degree of faith because trust is fragile. Trust is rebuilt all the time. Anyone who's been in a
Right.
long relationship knows that. So trust and that common connection is an important starting ground. I don't think it's the only piece. And so PIECE, just to be clear. So what I want to talk about, I want to take the lens back a little bit, because I think when we in America get activated by this continuing set of hostilities, it's not a single set, right? It becomes really important for us to sort of think about which lens are we bringing to the issue. And I think that part of the lack of peace in America in discussions about Israel and Palestine is that very often people are using very different lenses. So what are the sort of lenses, the major lenses, I think, which all provide some level of truth, but not the whole truth, and which can actually create division because people become deeply connected emotionally or otherwise with a lens. So we have the prophetic mode, we have the legal mode, we have a military mode, we have a geopolitical mode, we have a religious lens, uh, we have theoretical perspectives that tell us we should see the world in a certain way. I'm sure there may probably some economic lenses too. Each of these lenses produce very different results. And as a simple example, we'll start with just the prophetic mode. The prophets, certainly from my tradition, are presenting us with the highest possible set of ethical standards. The prophet, in the words of Abraham Joshua Heschel, are deeply pained by a sort of moral trespass that the rest of us take for granted in the world. And so in the prophetic mode, any sort of violence of human against human is deeply upsetting. And so when we operate out of the prophetic mode, then right away, anytime we see the loss of life, it's painful. And it's painful for all of us. And I
Yeah.
would like to live in a sort of redeemed world where the prophetic mode has been achieved by humanity, but that's not the world we live in. And so these other lenses are sort of equally, I thought about the historical lens, but geopolitics, right, would look at this and say, this is so much larger than the aspirations of Israelis and Palestinians, right? We've got regional powers who are playing their chessboard games as they always have, right? You've got Iran and its proxies, you've got the West and its proxies, and the history of geopolitics and that little sliver of land go back to the Bible, right?
Yeah.
The land of
Yes.
Palestine, of ancient Palestine, of Israel, is a crossroads. So it was used for trade. To this day, by the way, if you're a birder, Israel's amazing. It is one of the best places on the planet for birds, because the same crossroads that work for human traders,
Right.
the birds fly through. And so they stop
That's
there
right.
and hang out there for a while. So
Right.
geopolitics, I think, is an important lens that Americans aren't always educated in and don't think about in our discussions. It goes on and on and on. If you have a theoretical perspective, if you believe in intersectionality or view Israel, say, as a white colonialist enterprise, right? That's going to lead you to a whole other set of perspectives. And then there's the piece of history, which can be applied to each of these lenses, and which I think very often people choose their sides for whatever the reason and whatever the emotions are, and they tend to apply history, the start date, for whatever lens they're using in a way that benefits their narrative the best. And that also makes it extremely difficult to have peace, because I'm looking at this horrible thing and you're looking at this horrible thing from whatever perspective or lens we're operative in, and all we see is the injustice that the other has done to us. And so I think that part of the process, at least at some level, maybe this is too big an ask for the average person. I know that for me personally, I try to maintain and deepen my understandings in all those different perspectives, right? I have learned more over the last decade about geopolitics and military strategy and military law than I ever could have imagined. And it really opened my eyes. It gives you a very different understanding of what is occurring. And so I think just having that allows us, among other things, to have deeper understanding, greater access to different forms of truth, which is important. But it also, when we can entertain those, it allows us to be a little bit more dispassionate. And when we're talking about peacemaking and nonviolent communication, having the capacity to have some dispassion, some distance, even from our own emotions, so that we can look at them and see when they're there, is an important skill that we need to develop if we want to make friends where there is enmity and enemies. So all those things are important, but then because there are so many different perspectives, I think that tomorrow becomes more important than today.
Mm.
If we're looking backwards in time, there will not be any peace because the history has not been a peace, and we're going to, sort of choose in a way that benefits our perspective normally. But what Rodney was saying, and the challenge of scaling that up, is how do we realize, how do we live together? And that's about building some sort of shared future tomorrow. And while I
That's right.
agree with Rodney that I personally think a two-state solution is the most likely and best solution, it's not actually up to me because I don't have the same in the game, and that actually is something that has to be determined by hopefully Palestinians and Israelis of goodwill.
I
know
turned,
I've read many surveys along the in recent years where there is not a belief in a two-state solution among either Israelis or Palestinians who are imagining maybe a confederation, or there are different sorts of models that are out there. And I think what matters less than the model is just, can we somehow hold on to all these different lenses so that we can both understand what's motivating our own perspective, understand someone who may think differently than we do, gain some control of our justifiable and very strong emotions around an area of the world that is so important to Jews, Christians, Muslims, everywhere, right? But then say, what is the tomorrow we want? We know what today, we know what yesterday is. What's a tomorrow that we want? And can we, out of some sort of love, generosity, begin to move towards that? And hopefully,
no, Rabbi, I'm not oblivious to the fact that there are myriad of lenses that people are looking through. And no, one of my points was that I'm saying that we must build for peace. And the way you build for peace is people coming together in community, in education, and all kinds of things to build for those models of peace that will support it. And I just was citing a few that come to my mind that are operative there in Israel that are working. Now, all that came to a halt, I understand, on October 7th. And they're going to have to pick up the pieces from that terrible, tragic event that Hamas unleashed on Israel. I understand that. But that does not dissuade me or others from continuing the process, both here and there, of trying to sustain those building blocks that are there, that people are working on. And whatever I can do and others can do here and there. There are many forces abroad in the land right now that don't want to see that. I alluded to, maybe I didn't, to something called Christian Zionism. President Trump has just announced Mike Huckabee as the new ambassador to Israel, who is a Christian Zionist. Both the new defense secretary and some others are Christian Zionists. What is a Christian Zionist? They believe, and they have been for some time now gathering resources to give to Israel millions of dollars a year to rebuild the temple. Why do they want the temple to be rebuilt? So that Jesus can come again and judge the world. But to build the temple, to rebuild the temple, would have to be the destroying of the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock. The Dome of the Rock, the second most sacred place in all of Islam. So, and Mike Huckabee has been to Israel 100 times. He's raising millions of dollars to rebuild the temple. And this is the new ambassador to Israel. So there are forces that are abroad in the land that would not build for peace, in my estimation, but would set us back, way back.
And I would just name that even if Christian Zionism becomes a prevalent perspective in America through the presence of Mike Huckabee and others and in the media, it is not compatible with the heart of the majority of interpretations of the Christian message. I want to be sure that Abdulah has a chance to also kind of respond to this question of Israel and Palestine, and to say whatever you'd like to share with us just about this complex mess that David has named. We can look at through many lenses. We'd like to hear from your perspective
Abdulah,
through your eyes.
Yeah, I mean, so far this kind of conversation is telling us how it is complex, you know. I mean, definitely this conflict unfortunately remains one of the, you know, most modern history, you know, involving like historical grievances, political disputes, religious sensitivities, you know, and everything what the Rabbi said and Dr. Page, you know, like, so I mean, generally speaking, you know, like, I think this could be solved in 24 hours, you know, because it is point of the will, you know. But coming to the point of solutions, kind of, you know, yes, I know this two-state solution we kind of mentioned so many times, you know, and maybe that could be one of the reality. But to be honest, my wish is to have one state solution, a single democratic state that Jews and Palestinian, everybody will be like, you know, everywhere. The question is, you know, that is what we kind of maybe mentioned during our this conversation, you know, like that human nature, you know, kind of time by time manufacturing, you know, like some things, you know, to challenge the peace, to challenge it, maybe sometimes the simple solution that is there. And also what Rabbi mentioned, so many lenses, you know, we understand, but point is, you know, how we narrow all those lenses, you know, just to see the reality. So that is my wish, you know, but I'm afraid, unfortunately, that still we will have for, you know, I don't know. We need to have hope, as Dr. Page said. Yeah, we work, we will do. This is our part. I think we can do more, but this is what we, you know, all the time together, you know, raise our voices, something. But unfortunately, based upon history, you know, I'm afraid that this status quo will last, you know. So while saying this, you know, as our also like sacred book, you know, prophetic narrative saying, this conflict is, you know, not just this one, but will be there, that should involve some divine justice, you know. So I think, you know, as I mentioned maybe earlier, yes, we do our part here, you know, we need to, you know, but point is we are limited. We are a kind of so many things around us going on that we prove ourselves that we are not able, you know, to finish something that it seems simple, you know, but then we make to be complex, you know. So saying this, you know, we will continue, not just, you know, here what is our capacity, but also for sure our people there, you know, Jews, Palestinians, you know, people around the region, they will for sure try, those, let's say, good people, to do something. But I think, you know, as it mentioned, so that is because we come from that faith perspectives, you know, divine justice will be there. I think I mentioned something, you know, when we had the panel, and there are some things hidden from us that we just need to kind of, how to say, accept our limitation, you know, and see, okay, this is what I do, and there is the line. I think I did my best. So now we invite that, as I call, divine justice, you know, and, you know, kind of helping. So maybe concluding again, that is hope, you know. When I mention divine justice, I'm not saying, you know, like sometimes people understand, okay, divine justice, you know, God acts or something, yeah, but we need to do our part, yes, but sometimes again, we are limited, you know, we sometimes prove ourselves that kind of, we cannot go beyond something that is, you know, so kind of out of our capacity, that we as faith people should and need to invite divine justice, divine actions, you know, and, you know, see those things that will continue help us, you know, as I mentioned earlier, those stories from our holy books and scriptures, you know, that teaches us, you know, in which way to do, you know, because God did not just send the prophet, they send the books and say, okay, here. So he sent for the reason, you know, to help us, you know, how to live, let's say, normal, peaceful, you know, respectful life, you know, throughout this, how say, challenging and in some unpeaceful, you know, environment.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
the point is, you know, reality is there, status quo, you know, two-state solution most of the time mentioned, but my personal wish, as everywhere, is, you know, one state, democratic for everybody, you know, living, you know, together and helping those future generations to understand, yeah, that we are, yes, different, but also we can, you know, live there.
Yes. Yes. Well, regardless of one state, two states, I think both the Israelis and Palestinians, Jews, Muslims, and Christians there and here want peace. And we need to provide in the faith community those instrumentalities where we can come together to talk about peace and work for peace and pray for peace and do peace together. Because I think peace is a verb, not a noun, and that we must work for peace.
Yeah.
So that makes me think, Rodney, of one of the more significant questions that was shared following the peace panel, and this might be a good final question for us to ponder today. Someone asked simply, not a simple question, but
Yep.
someone asked simply, what one concrete action can one person do in our time to further peace? If peace is a verb, how can each of us work for peace? And someone in the audience was asking for specific suggestions. I think everyone there wants peace. So how do we do it, even one small piece at a time? I'd love for each of you to have a chance to respond to this.
Abdulah, do you want to go first? I think you've not gotten to go first on these yet. My own sense of equity and peacemaking.
Okay. Wow.
Right,
Nice. Good. Thanks.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. I mean, one concrete action, actually, I mean, there is no kind of, you know, like what we were speaking, you know, generally speaking, you know, yes, as Dr. Page, yeah, we want peace, we want, you know, to do it, you know, but what now is coming to my mind is, you know, it is said, you know, somewhere, you know, like kind of be the change you want to see. So be the example of peace that we are striving, you know, to get. So, there is so many, I mean, so many ways how to do it, you know. for example, in our tradition, there is prophetic saying, you know, like kind of defining who is the true Muslim. And Prophet said, like, the Muslim is one from whose tongue and action are save other people. So this is something that may be based upon our personal example, living the faith, living the peace, you know. But that thing involved, like, how we say before, inviting others to peace, helping them. I think we all, each of us, should find peace within ourselves. And I think each of our religions, they have certain, let's say, spiritual practices that can help us to find peace within ourselves. And then, you know, where we are peace within ourselves, you know, within our, let's say, family, because we have those, let's say, levels in the community. You know, first level is myself. So I need to make peace with myself, you know, and then with my family, and then with my neighbors, and then with my, you know, mosques, churches, synagogues, you know, so all those levels. So the point is in what? Personal example, personal change, you know, that is what we should do. Because if we personally change ourselves, you know, then we are building the community. We are talking about peace, okay? Again, I'm trying to be peaceful with myself, you know, like, and then I promote it. So personal, I think, I was again, let's all of us be that change, be that peace that we want to see, you know, by our actions, by our, how we say, like, you know, maybe I'm trying just, you know, like, you have history of or recordings of everybody, like, and then what is the argument when you face some challenge, you know? Look at my history, look my recorders, you know. Each of us, we know within our communities, we know people, you know. And then when you come to one person, yeah, I know him, I know her. She or he has no history of conflict, has no history of violence. That is proof. So this is something that we should live, you know. And then people recognize us as those, you know, people of peace, people of faith, you know. So this is challenging, but in the same time, you know, I think, how to say, maybe like this, our work, Imam, Rabbi, Reverend, you know, minister, doesn't matter, you know, like before we coming to this, you know, is it panel, is it discussion, is Zoom meeting? So we are alone. We kind of, how to say, we are preparing ourselves for this meeting, you know. And then that is, I think, same with peace, you know. If we would like to build that river of peace, the community, let's say, of peace, we need to come to our individual and personal level, you know, establishing peace within ourselves and start from there, you know. So this is something, you know, kind of that I wanted maybe now to share, and maybe concluding just, you know, again, in generally speaking, we need to educate ourselves about peace, you know. Maybe say no to violence, you know, like, you know, sometimes when I preach, when I do my sermon, people, you know, like sometimes even talking about some topics, you know, violence, something, I say, people, even, you know, say no, go out, you know, even like social media, like we have our social, you know, post there something that you say no to violence, say no to anything injustices, you know, support peace advocates, you know, like how they call them in our books, peacemakers, you know, support them, you know. And also what is maybe more important is that we all, from us and within our communities, we need to encourage ourselves to follow reliable news sources, you know, and also again, post with care on social media. You know, sometimes, you know, like we know that that power of social media, how can unfortunately produce some negativity. but
Yeah.
also can produce, if we are careful about that, then can produce so many good things, as it is, as it was like. Some changes in the world happen, moving those from social media and so on.
Mm.
So yeah, be the change of peace that you want to see. Families.
Good. I like it.
Rodney, how would you respond?
Oh, I guess I'd respond with two words. First, listen and speak out. Listen to what others are saying. Be active listening, a listener, uh, uh, but speak out about what you feel about some of the issues, the hatred, the bigotry, anti-Semitism, and Islamophobia. By speaking out, you connect to others. We need to connect with communities of faith in a way that we've never, ever worked before. I think the time is now for such a time as this, that faith communities need to come together, to work together, to pray together, to serve together, to be together. And I think if we can get our congregations together, it would be a mighty testimony that Jews, Muslims, and Christians can work and pray and serve together in this community in exciting ways. And just to have this dialogue, I think, is exciting and motivating for people. But again, I hearken back to President Obama's talk, because he says we must be able to promote diversity. What better way to promote diversity in this time than for us to come together and to work together? Because he says communities of faith working together on a common project demonstrates as never before that the wider community can see that the faith community can work together. And that's exciting to me. And I have worked all of my life to be able to see that people of faith can work and serve and be together, and to enhance and enrich the quality of life for people. Well, don't get me preaching. I'm so, my whole life has been devoted to this, that I see this as such a crucial time, such an important time as never before. And that we must take hope that we can do and be and can effectuate change and togetherness and community and oneness. And that through prayer and through participation, that we can enhance our communities of faith and demonstrate to the wider community that this is faith in action that really does make a difference. We can make a difference for such a time as this.
Thank you, Rodney. David.
Beautiful. Thank you to Imam and Abdulah and Rodney for your thoughts. So the lazy part of me just wants to say ditto to what our Imam said. I tend, that is my normal fallback, right? That it all does begin with the individual, and we've got similar stories, and that is ultimately where, if we have any locus of control, that's where it begins. So ditto to that entirely. And because I guess I'm answering this last, I don't want to leave it at that. And so the first thing I just want to say that in Hebrew, and maybe also in the Arabic cognate, shalom, the word it comes from the root shalem, which means complete. It means completion. It means everything. A lot of times, I think when we hear the word peace, peace, P-E-A-C-E, we think quietude, quiescence. We think that peace is tranquility. And it may be that that's a human error. And it may be that there's actually more peace than we're aware of, because we're confusing quiet, which is a different word, right, with what peace is, which is this collection of everything, which goes back to that inner work. When we pause enough, we'll see our own anger, we'll see our own rage, but we'll also see our own loving kindness. So given that, what are some concrete things that we can do, right? I think that if we nurture curiosity and kindness, those two things will go a long way. Curiosity starts with the proposition that I do not know everything and that I can learn from somebody.
Right.
So curiosity is actually a beautiful spiritual quality of humility and passion, really, to know the word. And kindness, of course, says that out of that sense of curiosity, I can make a difference. So here's a really concrete thing. If it is, as we've heard from both Imam and Minister here, Reverend, why don't you take like a little journal and each day commit to performing a certain number of acts of kindness. And maybe for the first week you start with one, but it should be an act of kindness that is directed to a population or group or age or some sort of people who you normally don't interact with.
Good
and if you
idea.
do that and track it, you'll begin to see that your life is making a difference, because so often, because we think peace is quiet, we look and see all the noise and all of the much world and feel like we're not making a difference or that we're ineffectual. So I think that there's that, and then add on the next week, maybe do 2, maybe do 5, and those things, like my mom would always say, when you smile, the whole world smiles with you. Those acts of kindness ripple.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
And kindness is ultimately a deterrent to our baser natures. And with deterrence of any sort, it's hard to see if it's working or not, right? We can only see the absence of its effect. It's harder for human eyes to see that by doing these acts of kindness, we've shifted it so that we're less violence or less problem in somebody else's life that we just touched momentarily, even in passing. And I think that those are, sort of a concrete way that we can begin to make a difference. And if that kindness takes place in social action or charity or whatever, that's fine too. But the inner quality, right, of kindness and curiosity, in addition to having these impacts of connection and concern, they're also states of being that make us more expansive, right? Those are both heart opening rather than heart narrowing emotional perspectives. And being in those states also is its own form of peacemaking. So,
Rabbi, may I remind you of Micah 6, what does the Lord require of us but to do justice, to love kindness, to walk humbly with our God?
amen.
I think Micah 6:8 is an excellent place to end our conversation for today.
Before you go, before we end it, I just want to thank my colleagues on this panel, David and Abdulah, and you, Cynthia, as our moderator. And one other person, I would like to thank Mike Reese, whose idea for something that would bring Jews, Muslims, and Christians together percolated. And this panel was one of the results, along with a wonderful video he made of our prayers for peace that Rabbi and Abdulah gave. And I just want to thank my panelists and you, Cynthia, for being a great moderator.
Agreed. Thanks. God bless.
Likewise.
Thank you all so much for the privilege of being together and being in conversation. And I look forward to our friendship continuing and there being other opportunities for us to talk with one another. But we also want to encourage friendship among people in our faith communities. And to that end, we simply wanted to share this video as a way of answering some of the questions that came up at the Q&A of the December panel. Right now, it's the end of January 2025, and a lot is happening in the world. A lot is shifting in politics in America. But as people of faith, we are all continuing to work for peace, to pray for peace, to answer the call to be the change that we want to see, to live lives of peace in ourselves, in our families, in our communities. As Rodney called us, to listen deeply and to speak out for peace and justice in the world. And David, I love your challenge of keeping a journal and intentionally committing one act of kindness. Maybe we can all be arrested for being kind. Who knows what will happen? Prayers of peace for each of you, my friends, and for all who will eavesdrop on this conversation as it is shared more broadly. So we end with Micah 6:8, calling us to love justice, do kindness, and to walk humbly with God. May it be so. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you.
Thank you.